The river was too clean. That was the first thing I noticed when the transport doors opened and the air hit my face. Not the size of the sky, which was enormous and blue in a way that made my chest feel strange. Not the smell, which was green and wet and nothing like home. The river running 100 meters from the landing pad was too clean, too easy, too there. I stood at the bottom of the ramp with my bag over one shoulder and my father's old water regulator clipped to my belt. And I looked at that river the way you look at a door left open in a place where doors should never be open. Something was wrong. Seuss reached me before I could figure out what. 6 limbs, pale blue skin that stayed perpetually damp no matter the temperature, and a smile that involved too many teeth to be comfortable. He was the Galactic Resettlement Council liaison assigned to my arrival, and he was already talking before I had both feet on the ground. Mara Voss, he said, we are deeply honored. Thesis 7 is ready to receive you. I looked at him, then back at the river, then at the sky where 2 clouds were doing something I didn't trust. How many distribution conflicts in the last week? I said. The smile flickered. We prefer to begin with the scenic orientation. The council prepared a full overview of the planet's natural distribution conflicts, I said again. How many? He answered, 14 in 7 days. I picked up my bag and started walking toward the camp. Thesis 7 was what the council called a paradise-class world. That designation meant drinkable rain, breathable air, mild seasons, abundant surface water, and soil that grew food without fighting back. It was the kind of planet that made soft-world colonists cry with gratitude when they stepped off their transports. I did not cry, I ran numbers. The 40,000 refugees living in the resettlement camp had come from Duval Station, a flooded orbital colony that had lost structural integrity over 18 months and finally come apart in a single bad week. They were alive. That was the good news. The rest of the news was standing in front of me as I crested the small hill above the camp, and it was not good. The camp sprawled across a low basin between 2 river branches, shelters packed close together, supply lines running in 3 directions with no logic, people clustered around the eastern distribution point, and even from up here I could see the way the crowd pressed. Not violent, not yet. Just tired and thirsty in the specific way that makes tired people into dangerous ones. Seuss appeared at my shoulder, breathing harder from the walk than he wanted to show. We have more than sufficient water, he said. That is what the council cannot understand. The planet provides in extraordinary abundance. And yet, I agreed. I took out my field tablet and pulled up the water table data the council had sent me on the transport. Good data. Thorough. Completely useless in the way that thorough data collected by people who have never been thirsty tends to be useless. I sat down in the grass, soft world grass, absurdly soft, the kind of grass that had never once tried to cut you, and I read every number twice. The basin sat at the confluence of 2 seasonal rivers. Right now, in what the planet called its dry quarter, both rivers ran full and clean. In 6 weeks, the pressure system would shift. Both rivers would swell. The basin would flood, not catastrophically, not movie flood dramatic, just enough. Just enough to soak the lower third of the camp, to push water into food stores, to turn the distribution network into a series of small disasters that would compound into one large one. The council had not planned for this. Why would they? This was a paradise world. I finished my calculation and set the tablet on my knee. Back home on Kareth IV, we did not have paradise. We had iron-red soil that burned bare skin in wet season. We had acid rain that came in fast and low off the eastern range and stripped paint off equipment if you left it out. We had the gray wolves, which were not wolves and were not gray, and had never once in recorded history lost a confrontation with a human who wasn't ready for one. We had gravity that sat on your chest like a disapproving elder. What we had more than anything was water math, the specific, unforgiving discipline of knowing where water was, where it would be, where it would go when you weren't watching, and what it would take with it when it left. My father taught me that math before he taught me to read. I unclipped the regulator from my belt and turned it over in my hands. Old aluminum casing, scratched in 3 places. His initials pressed into the base with a nail, the way people on Karath marked the things they couldn't afford to lose. He'd built the first catchment system on our ridge with this regulator at the center of it. Took him 4 years. By the time I was 10, it watered 6 families through 2 dry seasons and 1 bad flood. By the time I was 20, I'd built 7 more. I clipped it back onto my belt and stood up. I need labor crews, I said. 40 people to start, people who aren't afraid of moving dirt. Seuss blinked 3 of his 4 eyes. The council's plan was to begin with a comprehensive needs assessment, followed by a staged resource allocation review, and then 6 weeks, I said. That's how long before the pressure shift floods your basin. You have 40,000 people living in a bowl. I need 40 workers, a surveying line, and someone who can translate into Vanthari and Duvali both. He looked at the camp. He looked at me. He did the soft world version of water math, which was mostly just starring until the problem felt smaller. I will arrange it, he said. The first 3 days were orientation work. I walked every meter of the basin perimeter. I tested soil density in 14 locations. I dropped weighted lines into both river channels at 6 points each and measured the variance in current pressure. I made marks on my tablet that meant nothing to anyone watching and everything to me. The council observer, a Velhari hydrologist named Wren who moved like something designed specifically to make rooms feel crowded, followed me for 2 of those 3 days and said nothing. On the 3rd day he said, "You are behaving as if the water is a threat." I stopped walking. "On my world," I said, "it was." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "This world is not Karath 4. "No," I said. "It's softer. Softer worlds make slower disasters. Slow disasters are the ones that kill 40,000 people before anyone notices something is wrong." He had no answer for that. I started walking again. By the end of day 4, I had my plan. Not a plan the council would recognize as a plan, because it did not involve a 100-page report or a committee review or a staged implementation timeline. It was a set of lines drawn on a topographic map, each line representing a channel or a terrace or a corridor that would take the water, all of it, the beautiful, abundant, flowing paradise water, and tell it exactly where to go. I posted it on the central camp board that evening. By morning, 3 council officials had formally objected. I read their objections over a cup of something hot that Seuss had brought me, which tasted nothing like the coffee I'd grown up on but did the same basic job. The objections said, in various polished ways, that I was overreacting to a non-existent threat, that I was applying a Deathworld survival framework to an environment that did not require it, and that my approach risked disrupting the natural water ecology of a protected paradise-class world. I set the cup down on top of the objection documents. Wren appeared in the doorway. "The second objection is worth reading," he said. I read it. It raises a valid point about the southern tributary ecosystem. I adjusted the southern corridor 2 centimeters north last night. The ecosystem is fine. I looked at him. "Were you up reading my plan at 3 in the morning?" He straightened slightly. I was reviewing the data. Something close to respect moved through me. I did not show it. He would have been uncomfortable. "First crew starts in an hour," I said. "You can watch or you can help, your choice." He watched, but he showed up. The camp distribution point was quieter that evening than it had been in a week, not because anything had changed yet. Nothing had changed yet. It was quieter because people had watched someone spend 3 days taking their situation seriously, and that was its own kind of water, the kind that doesn't come from a river. I stood at the edge of the basin as the last light went flat and orange over the tree line, and I turned my father's regulator over in my hand once, the way I always did when I was about to start something large. The river ran clean and bright below me. Too clean, too easy, too full of itself. I was going to sort it out. The first trench took 6 hours. 40 workers, 3 surveying lines, 2 borrowed cutting tools from the council's equipment shed, and 1 woman from Kareth IV who kept correcting everyone's angle by crouching in the dirt and sighting down the line with one eye shut the way her father had shown her when she was 7 years old. By the time the sun hit noon, we had cut a channel 60 meters long and half a meter deep, running parallel to the basin's eastern edge. It looked like nothing, it was everything. Seuss arrived with 2 council members at his side, which was his way of making himself feel less alone when he had to deliver uncomfortable news. "The Infrastructure Review Board," he began, "has concerns." "Tell them to come look at it in 6 weeks, I said. I did not stop moving. "They feel the approach is." "Is what?" He consulted the tablet one of his 6 limbs was holding. "Aggressive water anxiety" was the specific phrase used. I stopped. I turned around. "Who said that?" The council member on Seuss's left, a Velhari with pale silver markings along his jaw, raised one hand with the careful energy of someone who had immediately regretted being honest. His name was Dr. Oren, and he had a wall of credentials from 3 institutions on his official profile, which Seuss had shown me on day 1. He was also, according to his own published research, the leading authority on Paradise-class hydrological systems in the outer reach. I walked over to him. "Show me your dead," I said. He blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Show me the people your hydrology lost, because every approach I have ever used came from watching water take something it had no right to take. My anxiety about water is aggressive because water is aggressive. Show me your dead and I will consider your objection. Otherwise," I turned back toward the trench, "stand somewhere that isn't in my way." Silence behind me. Then the sound of feet moving aside. Ren, who had positioned himself slightly apart from the group in the specific way of a person who wanted to be associated with neither side until a side proved correct, fell into step beside me without being asked. "That was not diplomatic," he said. "No. Dr. Oren has considerable influence with the review board." "He also has no dead," I said, "so he doesn't know what he's optimizing for. A hydrologist who has never lost anything to water is an enthusiast with credentials. I'll take his objections seriously the moment they come with scars." Ren was quiet for long enough that I thought the conversation was over. "I lost a research station," he said, 12 years ago, flash flood, still water event on a Class 3 wet world. We thought we understood the drainage patterns." I kept walking. "How many people?" "Equipment only. We were fortunate." A pause. "I have thought about the drainage patterns every day since." I nodded once. It was the most acknowledgement I had. By day 3 of the construction phase, we had 4 crews running in parallel. The initial 40 workers had grown to 90, because word spread in the camp the way it always spreads among people who have been through a disaster, not through announcements or official channels, but through watching someone who knows what they are doing and deciding to stand near her. People showed up in the mornings before I called them. Duval Station survivors mostly. People who had watched their home come apart over 18 months and had developed an instinct for recognizing someone building something real. I learned their names. Not all of them, not right away, but the ones who showed up first and stayed latest and asked the sharpest questions. Owen, who had been a structural engineer on the station and understood load distribution in a way that translated beautifully to terrace design. Clara, who was 17 and hadn't said more than 4 words to anyone in the camp since arrival, but could read a surveying line better than people twice her age. End, who had lost his wife in the final structural failure of Duval Station, and worked every day with the specific focused quietness of a man who needed to be useful more than he needed anything else. I did not ask about their histories. They did not offer them. We moved dirt together, and that was enough of a language. The council sent 2 more formal objections. I set them under my coffee cup without reading past the first paragraph of either. On day 5, Dr. Oren came back. Not with Seuss, not with another council member. Alone, in field clothes instead of the formal gray layers he'd worn before, carrying a small survey instrument I recognized as Valhari Standard Precision Work. He stopped at the edge of the second completed corridor and looked at the water moving through it. I watched him look. "The gradient is 0.4 degrees, he said. 0.38, I said. The last 40 meters run slightly flatter to slow the exit velocity before the basin junction. He was quiet for a moment, then, why? Because if it hits the junction moving too fast, it undermines the south bank over time. Not this season. Not next season. 5 years from now, on a Tuesday without warning. He turned to look at me. You calculated 5-year bank erosion variance for a temporary resettlement corridor. There is no such thing as a temporary water decision, I said. Water doesn't know it's temporary. He stood there for another long moment. Then he crouched down and looked at the gradient line with his instrument. Your eastern terrace, he said. The step height differential between levels 2 and 3 is smaller than standard. The soil density drops in that zone. Standard step height would create shear stress at the interface. He put the instrument down. I did not catch that. I know. He looked at me then with the expression of someone doing the specific math of realizing how wrong they were and deciding whether to be embarrassed by it or useful because of it. A moment that I recognized because I had been on the other side of it exactly once, at 17, when my father had pointed out 3 errors in my first independent catchment design, without saying a single word beyond the facts. Ren appeared from somewhere behind us. He had a gift for materializing when things got interesting. Dr. Oren, he said mildly, here to observe. Here to help, Oren said, and picked up a surveying stake. I handed him the line without comment. On day 9, the first completed corridor activated. I opened the diversion gate myself, nothing dramatic, just a manual lever, stiff from newness, and watched the water find the channel I had made for it. There is a specific feeling to watching water move correctly. It is not the same as watching water move freely. Free water goes where physics takes it, and physics does not care about your camp or your food stores or your children's shoes. Correct water goes where thought put it. Every channel a decision. Every terrace a word in an argument you are having with gravity. I stood with Owen and Clara and Old End, and watched the eastern overflow route take the river's edge and carry it, clean and fast, around the outer basin boundary toward the planned dispersal field. Clara said, "It's working." She said it the way people say things when they've been afraid to believe something would work, quietly, like a test. "It's working," I confirmed. That night, for the first time in 11 days, nobody at the eastern distribution point had to push. The water was there, enough of it, in the right place. The crowd was just people getting water. I sat outside my shelter with my father's regulator on the ground beside me and ate something from a council-issue ration pack that tasted like it had been designed by someone who had read a description of food, but never eaten any. Seuss came and sat nearby. He did not speak for a while, which was how I knew he was learning. "The review board," he finally said, "is requesting a full documentation of your methodology." "Good," I said. "They want to understand the framework." "Tell them the framework is this: water goes somewhere. Your job is to decide where before the water does." I ate another bite of the ration pack. "They can have the technical documentation next week." Seuss looked at the river, then at the camp, then at the dark line of the completed corridor catching the edge of the settlement lights. "It is already different," he said. The camp feels different. It did. I had felt it shift 3 days ago, and I had not said anything about it because there was no useful reason to name it. But it was there. The specific pressure change that happens in a group of people when they stop waiting to see whether someone knows what they are doing. I picked up the regulator, turned it over once. 6 more corridors, I said. Then the upper terrace system. Then we talk about the seasonal flood buffer. 6 weeks of work, Suze asked. 4, I said, if Clara keeps reading those lines the way she's been reading them. He made a sound that was the Velhari equivalent of a quiet laugh. I put the regulator back down and finished eating. Above the basin, the clouds were doing the thing I hadn't trusted on day 1, but I understood them now. I had run the numbers. I knew where the water was going. It was going exactly where I told it to go. The documentary crew arrived on a Tuesday. 3 of them with recording equipment that cost more than the entire supply budget of the camp's second month. A producer named Gail, who wore clothes that had no function except to look good, and who smiled at everything I said in the specific way of someone translating what they hear into something more usable. A camera operator whose name was Pete, and who moved with the practiced invisibility of a person who had spent years making himself part of the background. And an interviewer named Lena, who had done her research, which I could tell because her first question was not the usual one. She did not ask me what it felt like to bring water to a struggling world. She asked me what Kareth IV smelled like after the rain. I looked at her for a moment. Iron and burning rubber, I said, and something sweet underneath that we never identified. My mother said it smelled like the planet was angry and happy at the same time. Lena made a small note, and here. I looked at the camp, 6 corridors now complete. The first terrace section finished 3 days ago. The seasonal flood buffer in early construction, running along the basin's northern reach like a long, careful argument. Here it smells like water that doesn't know it's lucky, I said. She wrote that down too. The profile piece went up 8 days later across 17 distribution networks. I found out because Owen showed me on his personal tablet over breakfast, with the expression of someone presenting a surprise that they were not sure was a good one. The title read, Deathworld Instincts Unlock Paradise Potential. There was a photograph of me standing at the edge of the second corridor, looking at the water. Someone had gotten that shot without my noticing, which told me Pete was even better at his job than I had estimated. The regulator was visible at my belt. The article described it as a battered relic of Karath's survival culture. I read that line twice. My father would have found it extremely funny. The requests started coming the day after the piece ran. 2 colony worlds flagged my profile with the council's placement office. Then a third. By the end of the week, 5 separate resettlement projects across the outer reach had submitted formal consultation requests with my name attached. Suze brought me the file with the careful energy of someone delivering news they suspected would complicate their life. I read each brief, all 5 in order. 4 of them I could fix. The problems were real, the data was workable, the populations were stable enough to support infrastructure work. I made notes in the margins of 3 of them. Solutions in rough form. Karath math applied to worlds I had never stood on, but water math is water math, and water does not change its nature because you give it a different colored sky. The 5th brief I read twice. Then I set it on the table and looked at the wall of my shelter for 4 minutes. Suze, to his credit, waited. Vethai's colony, I said. Yes. 70,000 people. 72,000 currently. I picked up the brief again. The water situation on Vethais was not a paradise problem or a management problem or a planning oversight. It was a fundamental geological reality. An aquifer system in terminal decline, 2 rivers in permanent seasonal recession, and a population that had tripled in 8 years because 3 other colonies had failed and Vethais had taken in everyone who had nowhere else to go. There was no version of Karath math that made Vethais survivable on its current trajectory. I knew it the way you know a wound is serious before anyone tells you, something in the numbers that goes quiet where it should ring. "I will not take the Vethais contract," I said. Seuss was careful. "The council is very hopeful that." The council should be very honest with themselves about what Vethais needs, and what Vethais needs is not a better water corridor. It needs relocation planning for 72,000 people, and it needs to start that planning now, and it needs to stop believing that the right expert will turn a dying aquifer into a miracle. I put the brief down. Send them a hydrologist who specializes in managed drawdown and population transition. That is the honest help. I am not it. Seuss looked at the brief, then at me. "You could look at the data more closely, perhaps." I did look at the data closely. I met his eyes. That is how I know. He was quiet. Then he nodded and he took the brief and he did not push again. Wren found me that afternoon at the Northern Terrace site, where the flood buffer construction had hit an unexpected soil variance in the third section that was making the team argue about approach. He had started showing up without reason, which I had decided was his version of wanting to understand something. "The Vethais request," he said. "No, you didn't read." "I read every word," I said. "I did the math. I am doing the math right now in the back of my head while I tell you I will not take it. The answer doesn't change because I run the numbers more times." He was quiet for a moment. He crouched down and looked at the soil variance that was causing the argument. "Your gut," he said, "or the numbers?" "They are the same thing," I said. "When you have run enough numbers, they stop being separate." He looked at the soil. 30-degree angle on the step face, he said, for the variance zone. I looked at it. He was right. 30 degrees, I confirmed. We did not talk about Vethais again. 3 days later, I walked the finished second terrace section from end to end alone, in the early morning before the crews arrived. The water was moving through it correctly, quietly, without urgency, which is the sound water makes when it has been given room to do its job. I stood in the middle of the terrace and listened to it. The documentary camera found me there. I heard Pete's footsteps. He was nearly silent, but nearly is not completely, and Karath people learn young to hear nearly. I did not acknowledge the camera. I stood and listened to the water. Lena appeared beside Pete. She did not ask a question. She was learning. After a while she asked, "What are you listening for?" "The places it hesitates," I said. "If the water hesitates, there is a gap I missed, a decision I made wrong somewhere upstream. And right now it isn't hesitating," I said, "so I am listening to that while it lasts." She did not ask another question. Pete filmed the river for a while. Then they left, and I stood there alone with the sound of water moving the way I had told it to move, and underneath that sound, very faint and not spoken, the specific quality of quiet that comes from a thing working correctly in a universe that does not tend toward things working correctly. I turned my father's regulator over in my hand once. Then I went to get the crews. The alert came in at 4:47 in the morning. I was already awake, not because of any alarm, not because of any warning system. I was awake because the pressure data from the Northern River Channel had been sitting in the back of my mind for 2 days, doing the small wrong thing that pressure data does when it is about to become a bigger wrong thing. A number that stays flat when it should tick slightly upward. A variance in the evening flow readings that was 3% outside my seasonal model. 3% is nothing. 3% is background noise. 3% on Karath IV was how you lost a catchment in the night. I had the basin schematic on my field tablet before the council's alert system managed to compose its first notification. By the time the message reached Seuss's personal device and woke him out of sleep, I was dressed and standing at my shelter door with my boots on, doing the math. Pressure shift, seasonal, but early. The northern tributary was moving faster than the quarterly projection by a significant margin. In the current topography, that meant the western river branch would receive overflow volume beyond its standard channel capacity in approximately 3 hours. The western branch ran along the edge of the lowest section of the camp. 40,000 people. 3 hours. I was already walking. The camp was quiet in the way camps are quiet at 5 in the morning. That specific thin silence of people sleeping because sleeping is the only private thing left to them. Lights in a few shelters. 2 council night duty staff at the central point who looked up at me with the alarmed expressions of people who can tell from someone's walking pace that the next hour is going to be difficult. "Get Seuss," I said. "Tell him 3 hours. Western Basin Breach Point, the section we haven't finished yet." One of them reached for the communication panel. The second one said, "The automated flood response protocol calls for a full council assembly before any emergency infrastructure action can be." I looked at him. "How many people are in that section of the camp?" I said. He paused. "Approximately 11,000. "Run that number through your protocol timeline," I said. "Tell me how it comes out." He ran it. He did not say anything else about the protocol. Seuss reached me at the northern terrace access point 12 minutes later, damp, and wearing his field coat over what appeared to be sleepwear. He had the alert summary on his tablet, and the expression of a person who had been hopping the numbers were wrong. "The pressure variance," he began, "is real and has been building for 48 hours, I said. "I have the corridor layout here. We need to open the unfinished buffer section and accelerate the diversion gate installation by the western access point. 6 hours of construction work in 3 hours. He looked at the plan. "Can it be done?" "It can be done if we start right now," I said. "It cannot be done if we discuss it for 20 minutes first." He looked at me for one moment only. Then he started making calls. Owen was at the site in 11 minutes. Clara in 15, still pulling her hair back as she walked, reading the schematic I had sent to her tablet before she had finished waking up. End arrived with 4 other workers I did not have to call because they had seen Owen running and followed without needing to know why. That was the kind of crew we had become by this point. Not a workforce, something closer to a unit. I assigned positions in under 2 minutes. Owen to the diversion gate, which needed steel work I did not have time to do myself. Clara to the survey lead on the unfinished buffer section, because in 2 months she had developed the fastest accurate eye I had worked with outside of Karath. End to material coordination, because End never wasted motion and we did not have motion to waste. The council sent 4 officials to the site within the first 30 minutes. One of them was Dr. Oren, who looked at the scope of the work underway and did not ask a single question about authorization. He picked up a tool and found Owen and asked where he was needed. I did not acknowledge it in the moment, but I registered it. The first hour was pure speed. The unfinished buffer section needed 3 gate mounts and 40 meters of line channel to redirect the western overflow before it reached the camp boundary. We cut the channel by hand, by crew, by force of people who had lived through a disaster and were not willing to do it again. Clara called angles. I moved between positions. Seuss handled the material resupply chain with a competence that surprised me. He was a better logistics mind than I had given him credit for, and I made a note to tell him so when this was over. The second hour was calculation. The pressure data coming through my field tablet was shifting faster than projected. The tributary wasn't peaking at the 3-hour estimate anymore. It was moving at 2.5. I did not announce this. I changed the work priority sequence and started the fastest people on the gate mount installation. Owen noticed. He came to me at the end of the second gate, hands dirty, reading my face. "Earlier than you said," he stated. It was not a question. 30 minutes earlier, I said. "We are fine, keep moving." Are we fine? I looked at him. We will be fine if everyone keeps moving. He nodded and went back. The buffer section access point was finished at 7:11 in the morning. 104 minutes of construction, assembled by 90 people in the dark, and the cold of a paradise world that had briefly remembered it was still a world. I opened the gate myself. The water found the channel. It came fast, faster than the controlled runs I had managed before, more volume and more urgency, the river asserting itself in the way rivers do when they are reminded of their own strength. For 3 seconds I watched it hit the new channel and felt the specific internal stillness of a person waiting to find out if they were right. The water turned. It went where I had told it to go. The western camp boundary stayed dry. Clara, standing 5 meters away with her survey line still in her hands, let out a long breath. Not a cheer, not a celebration. The sound of someone who had been holding something carefully and was now allowed to set it down. Seuss arrived at my shoulder. He looked at the gate. He looked at the water in the channel. He looked at the camp, undisturbed, people beginning to stir in the morning light with no knowledge of what had passed in the dark. "How did you know?" he said. I looked at the water. I was holding my father's regulator. I had not noticed taking it from my belt. It was in my hand the way old tools find your hand when you are not thinking about anything except the work. The data was 3% off for 2 days, I said. On my world, 3% meant you paid attention, so I paid attention. That is not a standard deviation flag in any monitoring protocol I know. No, I said, it is a Karath number. It is the number that means the water knows something you don't know yet. He was quiet for a while. A council administrator appeared on my left. Young, official, clipboard energy. For the incident report, he said, I'll need to document the decision trigger that initiated the emergency response. Specifically, was the decision based on the automated alert or... I looked at him. It was based on the water, I said. Put that in your report. He wrote something down, and I could not tell whether it was what I had said or something more usable, and I did not particularly care. Owen was walking back along the buffer channel, checking the gate mounts one by one with a small survey tool. Checking work that was already done, already proven, already holding. He did it anyway. I knew that instinct. I had it too. I walked the full length of the new channel from gate to basin junction, checked every point where the water made a decision about its direction, every edge of the lined walls, every place where the force was highest. Nothing hesitated, nothing found a gap. I stood at the basin junction for a moment with the regulator still in my hand, and I looked at the water moving through the channel, and I listened to it the way Lena had filmed me listening 2 weeks ago, but not the same. Not listening for hesitation now. Listening to it work. End came and stood nearby. He did not speak. He had a cup of something hot and he held it with both hands and looked at the channel with the same expression he wore every day, careful, inward, present. Dry camp, he said. Dry camp, I confirmed. He nodded. He looked at the channel for another moment. My wife would have found all of this very interesting, he said, and he walked away. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not have been less than what he had just said. I clipped the regulator back to my belt. Above the camp, the sky was doing what paradise skis do, turning colors that had no practical function, organizing light in a way that served no purpose except to be looked at. Something pink at the edges, something gold above the trees. Useless, extravagant, the kind of beauty that would have lasted about 4 seconds on Karath before the acid rain reminded it of its place. I watched it for longer than 4 seconds. Then I went to file the incident documentation and write up the revised flood buffer completion timeline. The water was handled. There was still work to do. The system finished on a Thursday. No ceremony. No announcement. Just the moment when the last section of the upper terrace sealed into the completed gradient, and the whole network, 12 corridors, 3 terrace sections, 2 seasonal flood buffers, and the revised eastern distribution junction that Wren and Dr. Oren had spent 2 weeks refining together with a shared intensity that had changed the quality of their professional relationship in ways neither of them acknowledged aloud, became one continuous moving thing. I walked the entire system from source to dispersal field. Took me 4 hours. I did it alone. Every gate, every junction, every channel wall I had designed, and 140 people had built. Every decision made in numbers at 4 in the morning, or in dirt on a hillside, or in argument with a room full of officials who had never watched water take something they loved. The water moved the way I had designed it to move, quietly, correctly, without urgency, doing its job. I came back to camp as the light was going orange, and Seuss was waiting for me outside the central logistics shelter with a formal council document in one hand, and an expression that was clearly trying to prepare me for something. "The full system documentation," he said, handing me the document, "has been transmitted to 11 research institutions and 4 active resettlement coordination bodies. There is significant academic interest in the framework." I leafed through it. Someone had formally written up the methodology, the Karath math, the gradient calculations, the pressure variance protocol, the dual corridor buffer design. It was there in technical language that was recognizable as what I had done, translated into the kind of careful academic structure that would let people who had never stood in the rain replicate it somewhere they had never been. I handed it back. "Tell them the 0.38-degree gradient on the lower junctions is not optional," I said. "Every implementation will want to cut it to 0.4 because 0.4 is cleaner on paper. It is wrong in soil with variance above 12%. Tell them I said so." Seuss made a note. "There are also," he said, 3 active consultation requests with your name attached. 2 from colony resettlement projects, and 1 from the Council's new Planetary Infrastructure Division. I know about the 2 resettlement requests. I'll read them tonight." I paused. "The Infrastructure Division wants me to do what exactly?" "Advise on the development of a standardized Paradise-class water management framework," he said. "Based on your work here, a permanent position. They have offered a title, a residence on Thesis 7, and a salary that I am instructed to describe as generous." I looked at the camp. The distribution lines were running smooth, had been running smooth for 3 weeks. Children moved through the open areas between shelters without the compressed watchfulness that had been there when I arrived. It was not a healed place. It was not fixed, not finished, not resolved. 40,000 people do not stop carrying what they carry just because their water supply stabilizes. But the pressure was different. The baseline was different. I looked at Seuss. "Tell them I appreciate the offer." He waited. "I'll be leaving Friday," I said. He did not argue. He had learned over 3 months that arguments about where I went next were not productive uses of anyone's time. What he did was make a small adjustment in his posture that I had come to recognize as his version of accepting something he did not love. "The work will persist," he said. "That is the point of the work," I said. Clara found me the next morning at the lower junction, where I was doing a final check of the gate assembly. She came without invitation, which was normal for her now. She had stopped asking permission for things sometime around week 4, which was the right time to stop. She had a piece of paper in her hand. She held it out. I took it. It was a hand-drawn system diagram. Not Thesis 7. I could tell from the topology sketched at the edges that it was somewhere else, somewhere she had imagined or remembered or planned. 3 corridors, 2 terraces, a buffer section that was wrong in its gradient angle and right in its structural logic. I took the stylus from my field kit and corrected the gradient angle. I adjusted the upper terrace step height in the second section. I noted the soil variance compensation on the junction approach. I handed it back. She looked at the corrections for a long moment. Then she folded the paper and put it in her vest pocket. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. She walked back toward the camp. Owen was helping End break down the last of the temporary equipment staging area when I went to say goodbye. They both stopped working when I approached. Owen stuck out his hand, which I shook. End looked at me with the careful, settled expression that was his version of warmth. "Going to Duval's replacement site?" Owen asked. "The new colony?" "Not yet," I said. "Something closer first. There's a water table problem on a settlement called New Ferris that nobody has flagged yet, but will be obvious in the pressure data if anyone looks." "And someone's looking," Owen said. "Someone is always looking," I said. End picked up a support rod and went back to work with the efficient quietness of a person who had said his version of goodbye already. Earlier, in 2 words, in the way that meant he would not need to say another version now. Dr. Oren was at the Eastern Terrace access when I passed it. He had a junior researcher with him, a young Velhari man, and he was explaining the 0.38-degree gradient in the specific measured voice of someone who had moved from objecting to a thing to teaching it. He did not see me pass. I did not stop him. Ren caught up with me at the edge of the transport pad. He fell into step without invitation. We walked in silence for a while, which was normal for us. "The new infrastructure division will get it wrong the first time," he said. "They will get it wrong the first 3 times, I said. "Then they will get it less wrong. Then they will understand the 0.38-degree rule, not because I said so, but because their first 3 wrong versions will have shown them why." "Is that acceptable to you?" I thought about it. "My father got it wrong the first time too," I said. "The first catchment on our ridge had 2 structural errors that cost him a full season of water. He fixed them and he built 7 more after that." I adjusted my bag. "Everybody gets it wrong before they get it right. The thing that matters is building something that can survive being gotten right eventually." He was quiet. "Then we're after New Ferris. There's a basin resettlement on Calorie 3 with a flood cycle the survey team missed. And after that I received a brief about a coastal settlement on Duran's moon with saltwater intrusion into the freshwater table. That one is interesting. I've never worked with saltwater intrusion." He stopped walking. I stopped with him. "You are going to spend the rest of your career finding problems nobody else can see yet," he said. "I am going to spend the rest of my career making sure the water goes somewhere useful," I said, "whether anyone notices the problems ahead of time or not." He looked at me in the way he had developed over 3 months, not the skeptical academic assessment of the first days, but something that had refined itself into a kind of respect that he still wore slightly awkwardly because he was not naturally a demonstrative person. "The work here will be studied," he said, "properly, by people who will understand what you built. Tell them the pressure variance protocol is not optional," I said. 3% deviation for 48 hours is the flag. Every implementation will want to move the threshold to 5% because 5% feels more scientific. It is wrong." He nodded. "I will tell them." I started walking again. The transport was a council shuttle, small and functional, nothing like the smooth transit ship that had brought me in. I threw my bag in the hold and did the short checklist with the pilot, a quiet man named George who had been flying supply runs to Thesis 7 for 2 years and had the easy patience of someone who had stopped being in a hurry. I came back down the ramp for the last time and stood on the pad. The camp was behind me. I did not look at it for long. Looking at things you are leaving is a habit that costs time you could spend on where you are going. But I did look once. The corridors were invisible from here. They were under the ground, under the daily movement of the camp, carrying water in the specific directions I had put them. The terraces were not dramatic from this distance. The flood buffer was a line of shaped earth along the northern basin edge that you would not give a second thought unless you knew what it was holding. That was how it was supposed to look. Infrastructure that is working correctly does not announce itself. It is the absence of the problem, the dry shoes, the full distribution line, the child who does not know they were almost in a flood because someone was awake at 4:47 in the morning doing the math. I clipped the regulator to my belt. It was warm from where I had been holding it. My father had used this regulator to build the first water system that let our ridge survive 2 dry seasons without a loss. He had made 2 errors in the design and fixed them. He had built 7 more systems after. He had taught me the numbers, the pressure readings, the gradient rules, the specific patience of watching water do what you ask it to do. He had not seen a paradise world. He had not imagined one. He had lived his whole life on a planet that fought every living thing on it to a standstill, and he had bent over the hard red ground with a borrowed level and a 3-year-old watching from the slope above, and he had told the water where to go. His math was on 12 corridors and 3 terrace sections, and 2 flood buffers on a planet light years from the ridge where he built the first one. He would have found that extremely interesting. George called from the cockpit, "Ready when you are." I looked at the camp for one more moment. The river was running clean. The distribution lines were quiet. Somewhere in the lower section, Clara was probably drawing another diagram, adjusting the angles until they matched something that would work. The water knew where to go now. I went up the ramp,